today I am with Ryan from Contact Center Compliance. And for those of you that aren't aware, Contact Center Compliance is kind of, well, if you're not paying attention to what they're doing, you're probably putting your business and your customers in jeopardy. So Ryan's been with Contact Center Compliance for a good long time now, and he's joining me to talk a little bit about some of the efficiencies that the team over there at Contact Center Compliance and DNC.com, what they bring to the marketplace to help protect organizations. So Ryan, thanks so much for joining me. This is going to be fantastic.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, we've been a partner with CallShaper for a few years now. The company got started about 20 some odd years ago. I've been with the company about 20 years myself. Kind of got started when really the do not call lists were coming out. People are looking for a kind of a turnkey solution. We've kind of been the leader in the space. Everybody kind of knows us as DNC.com. The actual company name is Contact Center Compliance, but it's kind of what we've become known as. We're kind of the go-to company when it comes to DNC compliance, TCPA, litigator scrubbing. We do a lot in call deliverability these days, contact verification, reassigned phone numbers, and all of that seems to be coming to the top of people's list right now with some of the changes coming around with the FCC's rules.
Yeah. I mean, it's gotten, I won't say completely out of hand, but it's getting really tough to keep up with everything. So, you mentioned some of the things that you guys do there at Contact Center Compliance, but what are some of the biggest issues that you're seeing and hearing from both your customers and potential customers out in the marketplace right now?
A few things. One is the sort of uptick in traceback requests and complaints and issues associated with carriers reporting calls. So that's kind of the whole issue with some of these honeypot numbers that, I shouldn't say some, like millions of honeypot numbers that the carriers own, and also some third parties that essentially reporting bad actors. And so there seems to be an uptick in the amount of these numbers and the amount of complaints. And so we've seen a lot of platforms kind of like you guys get wrapped up in these tracebacks that are quite dangerous. And so clients are looking for ways to sort of not fall into that situation. So there's a couple things we've come up with. One of the things we've run into lately is sort of, it's quite interesting, where essentially where these sort of honeypot numbers come from are numbers that are not associated with individuals. So carriers buy these numbers or sit on them. They don't associate with individual. Some of them are on DNC or some are not, but their latest strategy seems to be using a lot of recently reassigned phone numbers as sort of trigger numbers. So what happens is you're calling off of contacts or leads, even opt-ins, and if the number changes ownership, a lot of times you can trip up on these numbers by accident, or your agent misdials a phone number, or somebody goes on to a web form and puts a phone number incorrectly into the form, and you call it and you call all these numbers. The carriers instantly think basically you're a bad actor, and it causes all kinds of problems. So one of the solutions that we've come up with, which has been very helpful in preventing those types of calls, is running data up against the reassigned database through the FCC. We're sort of unique in that space because we're an agent with the FCC, but we also have a daily updated feed that we use in conjunction with that. So basically, by kind of removing those numbers that have been reassigned or soon to be reassigned, you can remove the likelihood that you might run across these sort of honeypot numbers and get reported. At the same time, you can help your contact rates go up by taking numbers out that are sort of been transitioned to another contact that you don't want to get a hold of anyway. And that's also been something that's very high demand in the sort of SMS use case. Most of my clients are trying to shift a lot of traffic to SMS, especially retail or collections. And that's usually one of those things that comes up when they do a gap analysis with legal or with us. Is, that's one of the things you should really look at, is making sure that you're running that reassigned scrub at least once a month. Once a month gives you the most protection because you can get the safe harbor from the FCC. So that's sort of the other thing that we're having a lot of discussions about is, what are you doing about reassigned phone numbers? Are you trying to launch an SMS campaign? What types of scrubs should you be doing? And then kind of looking at that reassign for that kind of outlier for the sort of the honeypot sort of preventative, but also to get a hold of that safe harbor, and also just for sort of performance basis, right? Like if you got 20% of your data that's showing up as reassigned, and you can kind of clean that up, it can help improve the 80% that you're after. So it's been an interesting product, and it kind of had I would say a slower start than what the FCC expected because they kind of kept the price kind of high, but the rates have come down. It's sort of a little more reasonable now. And the other thing that's sort of going on with reassigned phone numbers, which kind of we talked about we did a webinar a couple months ago, was and I know you're out that area, but the state of Maine now requires the use of the reassigned database. So you have the FCC, that rule's been out for a couple of years, and now you have a state that requires it. So that's driving a lot of people into basically because not because there's a lot of contacts in Maine, but in essence, and they can find you, which is one thing, but also basically that other states are just going to follow suit. So that one's been interesting. And also just like the amount of cases that are out there. If you look up, companies sued for reassigned numbers and read about TCPA or go to TCPA World or follow any of the other LinkedIn lawyers, you'll hear that, these cases, when you go to court and you go try to dispute, any of these TCPA claims, if you had not been using the reassigned database, the courts are basically saying, hey, you didn't use the database. This is your own fault. Too bad, so sad. They're not giving any kind of relief in that area. Whereas if you have the proof that you ran it every 30 days, that gives you that safe harbor to sort of buffer those claims. So that can go a long way, not only in the courts, but if any of these sort of plaintiffs come after you in any of their sort of shakedown kind of tactics. So I think that one is interesting to kind of bring up in conversation, just in terms of like, as you're talking to companies, either make calls for you if you're outsourcing work to BPO, or if you're working with a lead buyer, just, what are you doing about reassigned phone numbers? How often are you scrubbing? Especially if you're looking at SMS and texting, because voice calls are a little different. Most people will tell you, hey, this is the wrong number if you call them.
Right.
Texting somebody, they're just ignoring. You text them enough times, it's the wrong number. Then they file a complaint or maybe look for a way to sort of get some retribution. So it's definitely worthwhile having that conversation about reassigned phone numbers. And
so you mentioned the honeypots, right? And, I've seen this hit a number of clients, pardon me, over the last couple of months. Have you seen dramatic behavior changes in the carriers and how they're doing this? Are there any carriers that have been worse than another? Are they changing algorithms all the time? I mean, what's happening with the carriers? Because it seems like clients that even back in March had a pretty decent contact rate are suddenly getting tagged as spam, and they're not doing anything different. If anything, they're actually slowing down their dialing cadence. But so what's going on in from the carrier's perspective?
I think the amount of flag has definitely increased, and we've even seen some carriers sort of, instead of waiting for the traffic to hit their networks and track it down to a particular caller ID, they're keeping some of these numbers already flagged before they even see any activity. And so, whereas before you had to make a certain amount of calls, get them on a certain amount of complaints, and that's sort of like the main driving factor is sort of call velocity, complaints, sort of duration of calls. And so if they see a lot of like short duration calls, unanswered calls, they're sort of looking at, okay, these aren't just telemarketing calls, they're unwanted calls, but we're going to flag it as telemarketers, scam likely, or whatever. And so that one of the carriers in particular has done that, where we've seen it where the customer just got brand new DIDs, and they've been sort of kept flagged until either they trust the traffic or we go in and run remediation on those numbers and get them registered. And get their reputation cleaned up, which is interesting. So I think the algorithms, I mean, at the end of the day, they're trying to outwit people who are sort of running illegal traffic, and they've got all kinds of schemas placed out there. I think the other thing that sort of changes, it's sort of become now a lot better in the carrier's eyes if you just keep sort of the same amount of numbers versus rotating DIDs all the time.
Really?
They want to see sort of a static universe. They don't like number flipping and number changing. So if you're sort of trying to um, out with the carriers and just check, when numbers get flagged, switch them out, that tends to look at negative as a negative sort of behavior with them.
Mm-hmm.
And interesting enough, we've seen some clients sort of like, we used to tell them there was a certain amount of calls per day they can make and per DID, and now we're seeing like if they start to trust their traffic, especially if they're doing remediation or call branding, they can sort of get away with that, exceeding those call volumes with lesser amounts of DIDs rather than trying to buy a bunch of DIDs and manage them. I think it definitely seems like more and more customers are getting flagged. I mean, I had a call this morning with a company that sort of does what we do as far as like contacting opportunities. They're business to business.
Mm-hmm.
They do a lot of thought leadership. They follow up on a lot of sort of web inquiries, and people are interested in their services, and their numbers are getting flagged. They, based on what they told me on their amount of calls and numbers they have, it doesn't seem like something that would affect them. But I think it's pretty universal. You see more flagging out in certain industries that are sort of obvious, things that aren't popular, like credit collections,
Right.
lead generation. So, I mean, it's kind of across the industry. I don't think anything's really immune from it, but that's sort of the reason why you need to sort of have a partner for kind of helping maintain that reputation of your phone numbers. And I think the sort of the misnomer in the industry is like there's like a couple myths. One is, well, I'll just change my numbers or swap DIDs, or I can get DIDs cheap. Okay, that's sort of like old school. That's not going to help you long term. And the other is that there are some sort of like almost like free registries out there that some groups have put out that people think, oh, I can just go register my phone numbers
Yeah.
here, and it's just not sustainable, both from a operational perspective, but just from a like they're not going to keep your numbers clean for very long. There's no guarantees, and
Right.
it's quite a bit of a hassle, and it's not really going to give you what a legitimate like reputation company is going to do. So I think, I mean, that's going to be around. I think the um, other thing is really just more of making sure that you have a way to give visibility on your phone numbers. Like, it's not just making sure that you're cleaning your numbers, but you should have some visibility on what's going on with your phone numbers. Because at the end of the day, lead right now with everything going on with this sort of switch to one-to-one consent and the FCC's rules going into effect in January, one thing's for sure, leads are going to get more expensive. And
Right.
so if you're spending a lot more per lead, you're going to want to make sure that you've got the best chance to get a hold of that prospect. Because I know if you talk to anybody in the industry or even a consumer, if a number's flagged, nobody answers that call.
Right.
Occasionally they get it wrong. Like occasionally I'll get a client or somebody that calls me, and I'll answer it and it said spam and it's wrong. Most of the time you answer, it's like, oh, somebody trying to sell me something that you're not interested in. So just one of those things that didn't exist. Like I said, we got into space 20 years ago. This stuff wasn't around. Like there was no call flagging. Like we first
Right.
heard about this probably 8 or 10 years ago from sort of a visionary in the industry in the telecom space. She spoke at one of our conferences, and everybody was like, "What do you mean the carriers are going to start blocking and filtering traffic? There's no way they would step on their own revenue source." And
Here we are.
sort of. So now that's also happening up in Canada, and I've heard in other international markets now they're latching it. So
Wow.
it's more of even a global approach, and um, So yeah, the flagging is interesting. And the other thing that's sort of interesting is sort of the evolution of the technology side where, the carriers have sort of all got together and figured out that, okay, now we can go sell a solution to the problem, but we can also add value to the caller ID with branded call display, or sort of the next
Mhm.
level up from that is more of the um, enriched call data, or like branding 2.0, basically, where you can push out a logo, you can push out a background screen, or it's rich call data is what it's called. Um, so those are one of the things we're looking at as far as like ways to kind of enhance that customer experience, because I think that gives you a lot more value than just putting on a caller ID that that's just plain text, when you can actually
Right.
have something that is a visual, but also to build that level of trust. Because look at all the scams that are going on, and people are being spoofed caller IDs. You have to just had a
Yeah.
big data breach with socials, so like you're really not sure if somebody's calling you if it really is your bank or whatever. I mean, there's lots of ways you can get tricked into things. So kind of building that trusted call aspect, I think a lot of companies are looking into that. But they're also like careful where they spend their money. Like, just because you can get this branding on your caller ID, like most of the clients I work with, they want to look at it and go, is this going to drive more contacts, more sales, shorten
Right.
our attempts to dial? Like they're very, you know, um,
What's
careful
the
about where
return
they're,
on this, right? What's the
yeah,
return on me doing this? If it's going to cost me money, that's okay if the return is there. Um, and the landscape is it's always changing, right? I mean, I'll see posts from you or Troutman Amin on LinkedIn or anywhere online and be like, oh my God, there's another case that impacts how we all need to start thinking about things. And it feels like everybody's playing catch up, right? And, to your earlier point about branding calls and remediating numbers, et cetera, and how they're getting flagged. Now, we have a client of ours that all they do is contact their own customers for their own medical device, upsell, resell, cross sell, renewing and refreshing things within those customers. They're getting flagged, and their customers that have been customers for 15 years aren't answering their phone because it's just coming up as spam. They're not even showing the number anymore. And, thanks to contact center compliance and us putting them into the daily remediation, it's made a huge impact in their business, right? So now customers can trust them again. And when they get flagged, those flags tend to disappear pretty quickly. So, I know that's one of the things that you mentioned that you guys do. What are some other things, Ryan, that are going on in the marketplace that are, that have you go, oh my gosh, like this is, you mentioned the lead brokers and how expensive leads are going to get, but is what's going to happen to the outbound call center?
well, I mean, the change to one-to-one consent is a big one, for it impacts kind of two sides of the business. One is sort of companies that are sort of were reliant on these type of leads. So a lot of your real estate, your insurance, your sort of small businesses that didn't have the budget or the wherewithal to go out and like create a sophisticated lead gen program. So they were able to, basically get, you know, sort of consented leads at the time, or up until January, at sort of a reasonable rate. But now, unless they're named in that offer and it's sort of explicit and meets all the conditions, you're going to have to either go create the lead yourself or be named in the offer. And what's going to happen is you're going to see more of these TCPA plaintiffs use that as their sort of, you know, one complaint 101, which is you didn't have consent, prove it, right?
Right.
I never opted into this offer. And so it kind of leads into that question of, okay, what can you do with those leads? Like, then you got basically, if you lose TCPA consent, well, guess what? Now you lost do not call
Right.
permission. So now you're probably gonna have to run that record through a DNC check. You Since you lost sort of a TCPA opt-in, now you're gonna have to sort of back off the mode of dialing. So now I think you're gonna see a renewed interest in sort of like more of like a manual one-to-one type mode of dialing. Like people want to contact these leads, but they want to do it where it's outside of the scope of TCPA, because those are sort of your couple protections. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Um, I think the sort of the to answer your other question earlier, like, I mean, keeping tabs on all these different changes, like hearing what exactly how companies are adapting. I think you're seeing an uptick like in interest in compliance around TCPA, DNC, call deliverability, privacy. So we're getting a lot of folks showing up on our webinars. We're doing our own compliance summit down in December, which we do an annual one there. So we've got information on that. It'll be coming out. So those are good because you can actually hear how, what the different attorneys are recommending, but how other people are complying with things, and just sort of get on top of them early. But yeah, I think the, kind of main thing we're seeing is companies are trying to batten down the hatches. Like they're like, okay, we need to solve for this now, which I was a little bit surprised by, because I was like, okay, we're probably seeing up kind of two sides, an uptick in business, more people wanting to run more litigator DNC type scrubbing towards the end of the year, but people are trying to tackle this stuff now.
Really? Okay. Well, that's
Yeah,
good news, right?
yeah, they're trying to get ahead of it and make plans. And I've seen some surveys on LinkedIn where, yeah, people are like, we're going to start requiring this 90 days earlier than what the FCC says, as far as like what the lead buyer community is kind of adapting to. And I think the other part of that FCC rule that's sort of that's going to impact things is really the lead publishers, the folks that are sort of like, they were, selling this lead to maybe 10, 20 different companies. They're, running sites that would say things like, you want to save money on your energy bill in your house, sign up for learn about solar. And they would sell that lead to 10 or 20 different companies. But I've seen some models out there where it's more of like a marketplace approach, and like it basically will let consumers sort of choose the companies they want to hear from. So I think that's sort of the trend that is going to evolve, is like consumers want choice. They want to be able to decide like who I want to talk to. They want to book a time and like self-service and like kind of take control of their own destiny, versus like the old way, which is why it kind of got abused, was you sign up for something like, interest saving money. Now you got 40 companies calling you, can't get them to opt out, lead gets resold, and you can't turn off that faucet. And that's sort of what drove, I think, the FTC were to try to act on that, because it was like the lead generation loophole, and then they blamed that for all the illegal calls and illegal texting, which is sort of a little bit not accurate. But I think it's here to stay. But there's also some interesting technology out there where there's some like open source standards that some companies are started to put out there, as far as like more like dynamic consent, and like, that industry is got a lot of tech savvy to it. So I mean, I think there'll be some solutions around that, but we also don't know how it's going to actually be enforced, and how much of that. I mean, like in the past, like the FCC has kind of been a little bit of a sleeping giant. They tend to like wake up once in a while and go after a massive robocall scheme and make a big splash, and they disappear for a while. So how much of that are they really going to force? But then you still got that private right of action issue, which is really, if you look at like the TCPA stats, like the last thing I read was, it was like cases are up a little bit, but the big alarming factor was 60% of cases are class actions. Those are the ones that are like,
Wow.
turn the lights out type cases. They're expensive, and I think there's going to be that going on. But there's also a lot of cases around some of the privacy rules, like SIPA here in California, and those ones are definitely worth paying attention to. I think we're going to have a couple sections on privacy at our summit. I went to the Travel and Amin Summit, the Law Conference of Champions earlier this year, and that one they covered that a lot. Also, the use of AI. There's some new rules around that with FCC. That there's a lot going on, and like I said, it seems like the trend too, like years ago, companies would try to insource a lot of this compliance stuff. They would try to manage it in-house. And that seems to be kind of gone away. Most people want a managed service. They want a company they can partner with. And like, then they want sort of technology that works together, right? They want APIs that connect into their dialing system and their platform, their CRM. They're looking for, well, who do you work with? How can I make my ecosystem kind of communicate so that I don't have these issues? And so that's what we're working on. Also, is a lot of partnerships with things that you might not think about, like lead tracking companies, lead management tools, CRMs, things like that. The obvious one is like sort of the calling platform or the SMS platform, because that's your point of failure, right? Like that's your last mile where you can protect a call from a litigator or on the DNC. But I think there's also a lot of like kind of just misinformation around like, what does DNC apply to? When do I need to run it? How do I register? What's up with the states? There's the basic stuff that has been kind of watered down over the years that we usually have those conversations pretty early on with clients and try to help them figure it out, what applies to them. And that seems to be sort of just trying to make sure they can solve for that. And then we go in and talk to them about call deliverability and branded calling. And then the other one that sort of where we started with was really that problem with reassigned phone numbers. Like contacts are changing, verifying contacts is important. So we've got a few different products in there for checking for reassign. We have a right party ID check that we run, which basically verifies contacts on acquisition side. So we're seeing a lot more use out of that. We just actually did do a big upgrade with all of our API stacks because we're just like all of a sudden we're getting all these verification requests that we didn't have before. Because I think that's the other part is like once you get one of these sort of consented leads, you want to make sure that you're getting all the correct contact information, that the consumer is giving you an accurate phone number, accurate name, because that lead has become much more valuable now. So I think there's going to be more demand for that. And also there's like, I think in talking to some other of our partners, there's a big demand for just kind of what your guys' theme was, which is really around performance improvement. Like before you make this call, what's the likelihood this is going to convert? How do you talk to this person? Making sure the agent has something that's sort of pushing them in the right direction.
Right.
Because like, especially in some verticals like collections, you've only got a few attempts before that's it. You can't call them anymore.
Right.
You got to be spot on. So I think that's also something that, having some, technology partnerships can really help out as far as, just making agents more efficient in the field.
Yeah, that's something that we focused on last year when we built our integration with OnScript AI to help our customers better be able to coach up the reps that they have, because every lead is so precious. Like you said, you've got to have these agents be at the peak of their game if they're making some kind of an outbound. If it's cold, they best be at the top of their game. But even if it's a current customer, right? Because calls are getting labeled, you want to make sure your agents are prepared and they have the tools to be able to execute easily and efficiently. And so, yeah, you're right. Like some of these AI tools that are out there are incredible. And some of the bots that are out there and available to help connect different platforms are really amazing. But, I think that there's still a couple of those bad actors out there that are like, well, I'm just going to do a robocall campaign. I'll run it from India. And then I'll just, I live in El Salvador, so what the heck do I care? They'll never get me.
Yeah, I had a call like that the other day. I was like, what do you guys do? I just make cold calls. We don't run DNC. We never do. I know that's illegal. And I'm like, wow, I haven't heard that one in a while. Like,
why are they even calling you? I mean,
yeah, it's just like, well, it's just like, exactly. What are you trying to, it's like, that was an odd one because most of the time we don't run into a lot of that. People that, like I said, reach out to us are trying to, stay on the right path. But I think that's sort of yeah, it gives the industry a little bit of a bad name. And I mean, that's sort of also why, like, we saw this whole trend with all these litigators a while ago, and like we're like, well, let's do something different about it. Let's make a reporting agency. So you can go over to stoplitigators.com. If you've got somebody harassing you and you want to share that intel with us, we'll get them on our anti-litigator list, because at the end of the day, those guys are going to dragging down the industry. So you just go in there and put in the complaint or whatever, and we'll take the phone number or whatever info you give us, and we'll match it up to what we have. And so it's been interesting. We've got like thousands of people on there that are like, we were surprised how many people were sharing willing to share information.
Fascinating.
So that's really where you see a lot of these litigators coming out of the woodwork. Is they're not looking to go to court. They're just, it's a shakedown.
Yeah. They
And
want to settle and get their cash and move on, right?
yeah, but it's like a catch-22. Like, you pay them, and yeah, you might be done with them, but you're just fueling the fire. But if you fight it, it's expensive, and they know that a good TCPA attorney is going to cost you a decent amount of money. I'm not going to say how much, but it's going to
Oh,
cost
yeah.
you a lot as a retainer to go fight it. You'll be out 10, 20 grand real quick. So that's what their kind of strategy is. They know what's out there. And when I was at the Law Conference of Champions, the thing that they were saying, which really stuck to me, which I hadn't really realized, is like, these aren't like guys that like failed law school that are showing up on these plaintiff firms. It is the most highly paid part of the legal profession right now. And so they're hiring like rock stars, and they're giving out like $500,000 bonuses, because these class actions are so lucrative. So it's not like you're thinking, oh, these guys, you've got that side of the business, which is sort of the consumer side, which is there's some real kind of not so nice people, but the attorney side, they're very savvy.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies that just they fall into that, right? It's just easy to, so there's a whole bunch of different ways to get burned in that space. But that's sort of the first thing, is don't fall into their traps. And then, clean up your data, make sure you can get your calls through, and then get your messaging out there. And then we're looking for kind of what the next thing is in the compliance space that we can offer. But it's been interesting getting in the call delivery space, especially around call branding, and getting customers set up on that, and giving them another option to work with us. But
So, Ryan, with the average contact center out there here in 2024, I mean, if you had to give general, like, one piece of advice that every contact center should be following right now based on what's happening in the compliance world, and I know that's kind of a landmine question, right? Because there's millions of things. But if there was one thing you'd tell a contact center out there, like they have to be doing to protect themselves, their clients, their employees, et cetera, what would you tell
I would really tell them two things. One is, you should be running some level of litigator scrubbing somewhere to identify these folks. I mean, it's not hard to do, not expensive. It's high rate of return. The other is, when was the last time you did a compliance review, with either a legal or compliance consultant, or somebody that really understands this stuff, can look at your business and find the gaps in there. Because there's a lot of things that are just really complicated, like state telemarketing registration or registration as a collection agency. Like, there's companies out there that can help you with that. We have our own compliance guide and kind of a do-it-yourself type structure, which is really good for like understanding and getting a baseline. But I think there's nothing better than having somebody that understands your business, your industry, that can give you like a third party assessment, so you can find out, like, okay, do we really need to run this type of scrub? Does do not call apply to us? Like, where's our biggest risk, and what can we do to sort of improve our operations around that? And then, like, if you haven't automated a lot of this stuff, now's a good time to look at it. I mean, like I said, we've got APIs with all kinds of partners, so it's good to have a conversation with us and see, like, hey, what are you guys looking at? do you need a platform we can plug into? And so we're trying to have those conversations with clients and try to just make sure we're bolting in and kind of take the human element out of a lot of these processes, right? Like,
Yeah, wherever you can, for sure.
yeah.
So I know you mentioned that you guys have your conference coming up. Tell everybody a little bit about where that is, how they can register for it, and can just anybody go? Because it sounds like this is one of those type of events that it could be really important for people to be paying attention to this stuff.
Yeah, so it's I think it's December 8th and 9th. It's in Clearwater Beach, Florida, which is out by Tampa on the coast. It's at the Hyatt out there. Done it there last year or so. We'll have the registration up soon. You can just reach out to me, Ryan at dnc.com, and I'll get you the link. I think we're gonna have an early bird special. We're just finalizing the agenda right now, but usually we do Sunday night opening reception, which is nice to get in early and mingle with people. Monday all day content, then do a dinner kind of reception, and then second day, which is Tuesday, we do content about 3 or 4. We make it a lot of fun. It's a couple hundred people. Anybody can register, as long as you're not a TCPA plaintiff, because then we'll kick you out. But we keep it open to the industry. So we have a lot of clients there. We have a lot of clients that are looking at us or working with the attorneys, but I think you get a lot out of it because it's more than just a webinar. Plus, you can talk to other companies about what they're doing and make it educational. But it's a fun event. Florida that time of year is quite nice. I've never been to Clearwater Beach, but it's like 75 degrees every day. And we're probably going to do another one in the spring in like the DC area, kind of mix it up a little bit in the following year. But yeah, that one tends to be about our biggest event is the end of the year summit. So it's a good way to get some face time. And we'll have like some of our call deliverability expert guys down there too. And if you're into that stuff with like tip tones and technical stuff, they'll geek out with you all day long. So
Right on. Right on. So anything else that you want to, let people out there know about what dnc.com is there for, how you guys can help? I mean, we've covered a heck of a lot here today. But is there anything else you want to kind of leave people with as why they should be reaching out to you guys? I could give them a million reasons, but
I think that we come up with some simple messaging, which I think is kind of summarize what we do: comply, connect, and convert. So comply with all the rules, TCPA, DNC, reassigned. Convert your leads. Make sure you can get through all the scam likely type things, and you make sure you can connect with your customers and sort of keep your reputation in check. And that kind of rounds out kind of our 3 kind of product sets that we have. And we're happy to do some testing with clients, and we get in there, look at how many litigators might you have, or reassigned phone numbers, or like you've got some caller IDs that you're concerned about. Well, let's maybe take a scan of those. And so a lot of those things are kind of eye openers, and usually don't cost any money to kind of look at, hey, where's our risk? How many of these numbers are showing up as scam likely? Like, we think this is happening, but let's actually go and improve it. And that's always fun to do, to kind of look at sample of caller IDs or a sample of phone numbers and go, hey, you just sent me 50,000 phone numbers. You got 20 class 1 litigants on here, and a lot of them are recent. That you might think twice about either where you're buying leads from, or your calling strategy, or maybe you're trying to do some litigator scrubbing somewhere else. Same thing with the caller ID stuff. Like, we'll give you a report, and if you got 80% of your numbers that are flagged, which is pretty normal. Usually customers, when we do the scans around caller IDs, it's 50-80% of them show up as flagged if they're not doing anything today. And like, sort of the outlier one that we pick up on, which a lot of companies don't even really think about or can't get remediated elsewhere, is with these third-party call blocking companies. So you're talking RoboKiller, NomoRobo. Just go to RoboKiller's website, read about what they do. They've got 14, 15 million users. and they will do all kinds of goofy things to your call, block them, mislabel them. They send you to fake voicemail boxes. The worst thing they do is they send agents to basically like reverse AI, which is just fake humans. So 20 minutes in the call, the rep finds out they've been basically just being messed with. Then they record the call. You can listen to it, and it's hard enough to get a good agent to retain them these days. Have them take a couple robo killer calls back to back. It's very unmotivating.
Oh,
So those apps are become much more popular. So being able to identify and remediate on them is huge. Very easy to get a number flagged on their networks. It only takes a couple of complaints. Carriers, it's a little different, but that can be a sort of a game changer to not overlook those apps. Including the Noma Robo Killer. So I think that's another thing to just sort of think about when you talk about call deliverability.
yeah, absolutely. Well, Ryan, thanks so much for spending some time with me today.
Yeah, man.
There's just so much we could dig into this for hours and hours, but I know you got to get back to your day. So, hey, listen, I appreciate your time. Have a wonderful weekend. And, gosh, there's just so much going on in this world. It's getting so that, well, they're keeping us busy, right? That's the good thing.
Yep. Good time to be in the tech business, in the compliance and platform space, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Ryan. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Alec. We'll talk soon.